the face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace.
This speech by US President George W. Bush was made less than a week after the September 11th attacks, in which planes were flown into the World Trade Center Twin Towers in New York, killing almost 3,000 people. What was strange about this statement, however, was that it went against a common Western perception of Islam at the time, and for over 1,000 years before. Despite this speech, George W. Bush spent most of his presidency fighting the so-called War on Terror against Muslim-majority countries, a war which massively contributed to the dominant anti-Muslim narrative of the 2000s. That narrative was all Muslims are terrorists. But where did this idea come from? To answer, we need to wind the clock back. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. During the 10-year conflict that followed, groups such as Al-Qaeda were formed, which were initially backed by Western countries to fight the Soviet Union. When the Soviets withdrew in 1989, however, Al-Qaeda turned its attention to the West, calling on the Muslim world to mobilize against what it saw as the oppression of Muslims around the world. 9/11 drew a direct link between Islam and terrorism in the minds of many people in the West. The war on terror which followed, led by the Allied forces, including the US and the UK, contradicted the core message of President Bush's speech after 9/11.
This will not be a campaign of half measures, and we will accept no outcome but victory.
And in the years that followed, the Muslims are terrorists narrative kept appearing.
1.57 billion. Let's just say 10% dislike us or hate us. That means 157 million Muslims hate us. If 10%, 5%, 1% are radicalized and would kill us,
that's the problem.
1.5 million people who are radicalized to the point where they would want to kill us.
In 2016, the Sun newspaper printed a front-page article declaring that 1 in 5 British Muslims have sympathy for jihadis. After receiving more than 2,000 complaints, the Sun was forced to admit that the front page was significantly misleading. The actual question that poll company Survation asked was, do you have some sympathy for young Muslims who leave the UK to join fighters in Syria? This question made no mention whatsoever of jihadis, Islamic State, or even the reason young people might be going to Syria. It also didn't clarify who the fighters in Syria were, whether Daesh, also called ISIS, Syrian rebels, Kurdish forces, or even groups loyal to the Syrian regime. But even the publication of the article showed that at a time where the public were worried about terrorism, in pursuit of profit, some newspapers were happy to make us the scapegoats, implying quite strongly to their readers that to be Muslim meant to support terrorism. In fact, everywhere you look, you can see examples of these simplifications and stereotypes linking Muslims to terrorists. So, where do these stereotypes come from? People who support this narrative often refer directly to the Qur'an as proof that Islam supports violence and justifies terrorism.
And if you read the Qur'an, as I've read it, there is a lot of verses in there.
You might have seen articles like these before, where quotes are picked out with no context, quotes which seem to support the accusation. The problem is that the context is actually very important. Quotes like this one sound pretty clear-cut, right? But the context surrounding this quote recounts a time when the Prophet Muhammad and his followers were returning to Mecca after previously fleeing persecution, and are told by God if they are attacked, they can kill the attackers in self-defense, but only if necessary. It definitely does not suggest targeting innocent people or killing civilians. Jihad is another word taken from the Qur'an that is used to justify violence in the name of Islam, but its actual definition is rarely explained. It translates literally as a struggle, originally meaning resisting religious persecution, but it also includes an individual's spiritual struggle against material desires. Like in both the Bible and the Torah, in the Qur'an there are some passages which extremists have misinterpreted to justify their actions. But some news articles often simplify and only present their own interpretation and not the context and debate that surround it. And this is key to maintaining the negative perception of Muslims. Take the common demand that Muslims should condemn acts of terror. But when was the last time we asked Christians to apologise for terrorist acts done in the name of Christianity, or British citizens to apologise for crimes committed by other British people? Or how often did articles which made that demand fail to share studies showing how the vast majority of us already disagree with terrorism? In fact, how often do you hear our voices at all in these stories?
You're not seriously blaming all Muslims for what happened on September the 11th.
No, but I don't need to. Why do we need?
This is a fight for Western civilization. We need to be all in on it. And the simple fact is, these are Islamic terrorists that just
themselves. No, it's Muslim terrorists.
Yes, Muslim terrorists.
Right.
The actions of extremist groups have dominated media portrayals of Muslims in the last 20 years. These portrayals can then influence public perceptions of Islam. But the biggest victims of terrorism by these groups are Muslims themselves. And the voices of those people, and the voices of Muslims who constantly condemn the violence committed by terrorist groups, are the ones that are so rarely heard when we are discussing terrorism.
We're talking about religion, Lisa. We're talking about religion.
Right now in the world are killing Muslims. This is a problem of extremism.